trivial misunderstanding spiraled into years of silence between me and my childhood best friend. This is my journey through anger, regret, and the hope of mending what was broken.
Sometimes a memory hits you like a phantom limb ache, a deep, persistent throb where something vital used to be. For me, that ache is named Emily. It's been years now, more years than I can count on my fingers and toes since I last truly spoke to her. Years since I heard her laugh, a sound like wind chimes in a summer breeze, or saw her eyes crinkle at the corners when she was trying not to smile. But every time I catch a whiff of lavender, or hear a specific Fleetwood Mac song, or even just see a house with a porch swing, it's like a fresh cut and the wound reopens.
Emily was more than a best friend. She was the other half of my childhood, the mirror to my soul, the confidant who knew my deepest fears and wildest dreams before I even dared to whisper them. We were inseparable, like two vines growing around the same sturdy oak, our lives so intertwined you couldn't tell where one began and the other ended. Our families, too, were woven into the same fabric of our small-town life. Gatherings, holidays, Sunday dinners, they all blurred into one shared history, rich with laughter and easy comfort. We were practically sisters, bound not by blood, but by something far more potent, shared experience, unconditional understanding, and the simple, profound joy of being entirely ourselves with each other. The idea that anything could ever come between us felt as impossible as the sky falling. And yet, it did. Not with a bang, not with a dramatic betrayal or a fiery argument between us. No, it was far more insidious, far more tragic. It started as a tiny crack, a hairline fracture in the foundation of our family's decades-long friendship, a crack caused by something so utterly trivial, so mind-numbingly pointless, that even now, recalling it fills me with a cold, hollow rage. It wasn't a secret, or a grand deception, or a calculated act of malice. It was just a misunderstanding, a whisper twisted into a shout, a small slight magnified by pride and stubbornness until it became a chasm. A family feud, they called it, a war that neither Emily nor I ever enlisted in, but one that consumed us nonetheless. It felt like watching a slow-motion car crash, powerless to stop the inevitable devastation. And in that devastation, I lost her. I lost not just a friend, but a piece of my own history, a chunk of my identity, a future that I had always envisioned with her by my side. The silence that followed was deafening, a constant hum of absence that still echoes in the quiet corners of my life. It was a silence born of hurt, sustained by pride, and fueled by a grief so profound it felt like mourning someone who was still alive, just not for me. This isn't a story about finding a new best friend, or about moving on without a trace. This is a story about the lingering ache of absence, the corrosive nature of unspoken resentments, and the arduous, terrifying journey through anger, regret, and the fragile, persistent hope of mending what was broken, even if it's just the shattered pieces of my own heart.
Our story begins, as most good stories do, in the hazy, sun-drenched days of childhood. I grew up in Willow Creek, a quaint little town nestled in a valley where everyone knew everyone else's business, and the pace of life was measured by the seasons, not the clock. My house, a sturdy two-story with a wraparound porch, sat just 2 doors down from Emily's. Her house was a charming, slightly eccentric Victorian with a riot of climbing roses around the front door, mirroring her family's vibrant, sometimes chaotic energy. My parents, Robert and Eleanor, were salt-of-the-earth types. My dad, a quiet but firm carpenter, was a man of few words but deep convictions. My mom, a school librarian, was the glue that held our family together. Kind, observant, and fiercely loyal. We were a family built on routine, respect, and a quiet sense of duty. Sunday dinners at my grandmother's house were sacred, and unspoken rules about family unity ran deep. My younger brother, Michael, was often the cheerful, boisterous counterpoint for my more contemplative nature. Emily's family, the Millers, were a different breed altogether. Her father, David, was a jovial, booming man who owned the local hardware store, always ready with a laugh and a story. Her mother, Susan, was a force of nature, dynamic, outspoken, and incredibly community-minded. She organized every town event, from the annual Harvest Festival to the Christmas charity drive. Emily, their only child, inherited her mother's spark and her father's easygoing warmth. Their home was always bustling, filled with music, impromptu gatherings, and lively debates around the kitchen table. They had a warmth that drew people in, a kind of contagious exuberance. From the moment Emily and I met, tumbling out of our respective houses at the tender age of 5, our connection was instantaneous. We spent our childhoods practically living in each other's pockets. Our backyards merged into one sprawling playground, our treehouse the undisputed headquarters of our imaginary kingdoms. We knew every secret passage through the overgrown bushes, every creak in the floorboards of each other's homes. We braided each other's hair, concocted elaborate plans for lemonade stands, and whispered our dreams under blankets with flashlights long after our parents thought we were asleep. We'd spend hours poring over old photo albums, giggling at our awkward stages, planning our futures with the absolute certainty that we'd always be together, living side by side, raising our own children who would, of course, also be best friends. Our families weren't just neighbors, they were extensions of each other. My mom and Susan were co-conspirators in community projects and shared their gardening tips over the fence. My dad and David would spend hours in David's garage, tinkering with engines or sharing stories over cold beers. Michael, my younger brother, looked up to Emily like an older sister, and I adored the Millers like they were my second set of parents. They were the ones who taught me how to ride a bike without training wheels, who comforted me when my first pet died, who celebrated my smallest victories with genuine pride. We celebrated holidays together, vacationed at the same lake cabin every summer, and relied on each other in times of need without question or hesitation. This wasn't just friendship, it was a deeply rooted generational bond. It felt unbreakable, an eternal constant in a world that was always changing. We often said we were proof that families didn't have to share blood to share a soul. We believed it implicitly. It was this deep, intertwined history, this rich tapestry of shared life, that made the unraveling so utterly devastating, so incomprehensible when it finally began. The first subtle shifts began, as most insidious things do, almost imperceptibly, like a slow tide eroding a shoreline. It wasn't a sudden storm, but a quiet, constant wearing away. The year was 2004, and the annual Willow Creek Summer Fair was approaching. My mother, Eleanor, had always been the meticulous organizer of the Arts and Crafts exhibition, a role she took immense pride in. Emily's mother, Susan, was in charge of the main stage events and the silent auction, bringing her characteristic flair and energy to everything she touched. They'd worked together for years, their complementary styles a well-oiled machine. This year, however, there was a new element, A young, ambitious city planner, Mr. Henderson, had moved to Willow Creek and decided the fair needed a modern overhaul. He wanted to introduce digital ticketing, new food vendors, and, most controversially, move the main stage from its traditional spot near the old oak tree to a more central but significantly smaller paved area. This immediately put my mother and Susan on edge. My mother felt her years of experience were being disrespected. Susan, ever a pragmatist, saw the logistical nightmare of the new stage location. The initial friction wasn't between our mothers, but between them and Mr. Henderson. They presented a united front, but the strain was visible. Then, the inevitable happened. During a tense planning meeting, my mother, trying to highlight the potential for overcrowding at the new stage, mentioned that Susan's sound equipment would barely fit there, let alone a dance troupe. It was an innocent observation, I thought, a practical concern. But Susan, already stressed, interpreted it as a slight, as if my mother was implying her stage efforts were secondary, or that her equipment was somehow a hindrance. Her face, usually so expressive, tightened into a mask of indignation. I remember seeing her jaw clench as she retorted, her voice sharper than usual. "My equipment has always been perfectly adequate. Perhaps it's the crafts that should be moved to a smaller tent if space is such a concern." It was a small barb, quickly smoothed over by the fair committee chairman, but the air in the room had shifted. My mother, visibly hurt, had flushed crimson. Over the next few weeks, the small comments started. My mother would say, "I heard Susan is still having trouble finding volunteers for the raffle booth. Poor planning, I suppose." And Emily would relay with a conflicted expression that her mother had remarked, "Eleanor's crafts fair seems to be attracting more dust bunnies than patrons this year." These weren't outright insults, but subtle digs, undermining the other's efforts, casting a shadow of passive aggression over their interactions. Emily and I, caught in the middle, tried to laugh it off, attributing it to fair stress, but a chill had entered the easy warmth between our families. Then came the great banner disaster. Emily's dad, David, had generously offered to print the main fair banner at his hardware store, using a new large-format printer he'd just acquired. My dad, Robert, had helped him design the layout, spending evenings at the store meticulously checking fonts and colors. The banner arrived a week before the fair, and it was perfect, except for one crucial detail. The dates for the arts and crafts exhibition were off by one day. A simple typo, easily fixed, but in the escalating tension, it became a point of contention. My mom insisted David should have double-checked. Susan argued Eleanor should have provided clearer final proof. It was a whirlwind of blame, each parent defending their spouse with increasing vehemence. My dad, usually so calm, actually raised his voice on the phone with David, accusing him of sloppiness that would cost us donations. David, equally stubborn, countered that my mom's indecision had led to the mistake. Emily and I, then 16, watched this unfold with growing horror. We'd tried to broker peace, suggesting, "It was just a mistake, Mom, Dad. Everyone makes them." But our pleas were met with exasperated sighs and dismissive waves of the hand. "You don't understand, sweetie. It's a matter of respect," my mother would say, and Emily's parents would tell her, "Some people just like to nitpick, honey. Don't let it bother you." The words weren't aimed at us, but they felt like shrapnel. We found ourselves editing our conversations with each other, omitting details about our parents' latest grievances, walking on eggshells when our families were in the same room. The effortless banter that once flowed between our parents was replaced with strained civility, forced smiles, and an underlying hum of resentment. The laughter died down, replaced by an uncomfortable quiet. The invisible wall was slowly but surely rising, brick by brick. The Willow Creek Summer Fair, the very event meant to bring the community together, became the setting for the final, devastating crack.
It was a sweltering Saturday afternoon, the kind where the air hung heavy and thick with humidity, mirroring the tension that had been building between our families. Emily and I were supposed to be having fun, helping out at our respective family booths. Instead, we moved with a palpable sense of dread, like actors in a play we desperately wanted to leave. The initial banner disaster had been patched up with a hastily printed sticker, but the resentment lingered. Then came the incident with the prize chicken. For the annual raffle, Emily's mother, Susan, had secured a prize-winning Rhode Island red rooster from a local farm, a truly magnificent bird. My mother, Eleanor, had spent weeks crafting an intricate hand-painted birdhouse to go with it, a prize she was exceptionally proud of. The drawing was scheduled for 3 p.m., right by the main stage. Around 2:45 p.m., a small child, unsupervised for a moment, had wandered into the pen where the prize rooster was being held, startling it. The bird flapped wildly, its large crate tipping over, and the rooster escaped, creating a chaotic flurry. People screamed, children cried, and the rooster, in a state of avian panic, bolted towards the direction of the arts and crafts tent, kicking up dust and feathers in its wake. It was pure slapstick, a scene that under normal circumstances would have been hilarious, a funny anecdote for years to come. But not that day. My father, Robert, who was helping my mother at her booth, saw the commotion. He, in his desire to help, decided the best course of action was to tackle the rooster. He lunged, missed, and instead collided with a display table laden with my mother's prize-winning ceramic pottery, sending it crashing to the ground in a cacophony of shattering earthenware. Simultaneously, the rooster, still panicked, veered sharply and relieved itself directly on a pristine white linen tablecloth Susan had meticulously embroidered for the raffle booth. It was a disaster of epic proportions, a comedy of errors turned tragic. Susan, seeing the ruined tablecloth and the general chaos, marched over, her face a thundercloud. "Robert, in heaven's name, what were you thinking? You've ruined my display." My father, red-faced and covered in dust, retorted, "I was trying to help. Maybe if you'd secured your bird properly, this wouldn't have happened." My mother, rushing to my father's side amidst her shattered pottery, added her own furious accusation. "And look what your clumsy efforts have done to my ceramics, Susan. Weeks of work, gone." Emily and I had been standing near the main stage, watching the raffle drawing prepare. We saw the entire debacle unfold in slow motion. We rushed over, Emily trying to calm her mother, me trying to appease mine. But it was too late. The dam had broken. The years of small slights, the silent resentments, the banner dispute, the stage location arguments, it all coalesced into this single, public, humiliating moment. Voices were raised, not just between our mothers, but now between our fathers. Accusations flew about negligence, disrespect, and always having to clean up after others. People around us fell silent, their eyes darting between the two warring families, the comfortable veneer of community shattered. Then my mother, her voice trembling with fury and hurt, pointed a finger at Emily's mother. "You know what, Susan? I've had enough. I've had enough of your passive-aggressive jabs and your blatant disregard for other people's efforts. Maybe it's best we just keep our distance. It's clear we don't see eye to eye anymore." Susan, equally incensed, shot back, "Fine by me, Eleanor. Frankly, I'm tired of your condescending attitude and your husband's destructive incompetence. Consider our friendship over." In that moment, their eyes, usually so warm and familiar, were cold, hard, and filled with a venomous anger I had never witnessed. They weren't looking at each other as old friends, but as bitter enemies. And as those words hung in the air, thick with their finality, their gaze flickered to Emily and I, standing frozen between them. It was a silent command, a stark, unspoken ultimatum. Choose. Choose your family. Choose your side. Emily and I looked at each other, our eyes wide with shock and unshed tears. I felt a lower lip tremble, her face pale. I felt a knot of ice form in my stomach. The air crackled with a force that wasn't just anger, but the crushing weight of everything that had been, everything that was now irrevocably broken.
We were 16, and in that agonizing instant, our childhood, our shared future, and the very foundation of our lives shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The friendship, the one thing we thought was truly sacred, became collateral damage in a war we never wanted, never understood, and were utterly powerless to stop. I felt a physical ripping sensation, as if a part of my own soul had been torn away, leaving a gaping, bleeding wound. The immediate aftermath was a desolate, echoing silence that felt heavier than any noise. The fair, which had once been a symbol of our town's unity and our family's intertwined lives, became the bitter grave of our friendship. The rest of that day was a blur of tears, hushed family arguments, and the cold, hard realization that something fundamentally good had died. My parents, reeling from the public confrontation, forbade me from seeing or speaking to Emily. "They crossed a line, Sarah," my mother declared, her voice tight with wounded pride. "They showed their true colors. We can't associate with people like that." Emily, I learned later through hushed whispers from mutual acquaintances, had received a similar edict from her parents. The first few weeks were excruciating. Our houses, once extensions of each other, became fortified islands. I'd walk past Emily's house, heart pounding, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, a sign. But the roses on her porch seemed to wilt, and the windows seemed like empty eyes. When I did see her, it was usually from a distance, across the grocery store aisle or at school. Our eyes would meet for a fraction of a second, a flicker of raw pain, before we'd both quickly look away, as if acknowledging each other would be an act of betrayal. The silence between us was not just absence of sound, it was a living, breathing entity, a monstrous third party that stood between us, guarding the chasm. High school, which had been a vibrant shared journey, became a lonely path. We had the same friends, but now they were caught in the awkward crossfire. Parties became uncomfortable social balancing acts. Group outings felt like minefields. Slowly, subtly, our shared friend group fractured. Some chose sides, others drifted away, unable to navigate the suffocating tension. I spent many nights crying into my pillow, clutching old photos of Emily and me, trying to reconcile the smiling girl in the pictures with the distant, wounded stranger she had become. The anger simmered, not just at our parents, but at the injustice of it all, and yes, even at Emily, for not fighting harder, for not defying her parents, for letting our bond dissolve so easily. A part of me knew it wasn't fair, that she was as much a victim as I was, but the pain twisted my logic. Years bled into each other, each one cementing the silence. We graduated high school without a word, without a glance, our paths diverging even as we walked across the same stage. It felt like walking through glass, aware of every fragile step. I went off to university, eager for a fresh start, a place where no one knew the story of the lost best friend and the family feud. But Emily's ghost followed me. Every new friend I made, every intimate conversation I had, felt like a pale imitation, a reminder of the depth of connection I had once shared and now lacked. I found myself guarded, hesitant to open up fully, terrified of another loss, another betrayal, another arbitrary shattering of trust. I tried to move on, I really did. I built a life, a career in graphic design, new friendships, new routines, but the void remained. Holidays, once a vibrant kaleidoscope of shared joy, became quieter, tinged with a melancholy only I seemed to feel. My parents, though they never spoke of the Millers directly, lived with an unspoken tension, a hardened shell of pride that had replaced their former warmth. Their feuding cost them friends and community too, though they seemed less willing to acknowledge it. There were moments, sharp and unexpected, when the pain would resurface with agonizing clarity. Years after the fair, I saw Emily at a mutual friend's wedding.
She looked stunning, glowing in a sapphire dress. Our eyes met across the crowded reception hall, and for a fleeting second, the years melted away. I saw the girl I knew, the one who understood me without words. My heart leaped, a desperate hope fluttering in my chest. I almost walked towards her, almost reached out. But then her mother, Susan, appeared beside her, her gaze cold and unyielding. Emily's expression hardened, and she quickly turned away, her back to me. The phantom limb ache returned with a vengeance, sharper than ever. I spent the rest of the evening in a haze, watching her laugh with others, a profound sense of isolation washing over me. As I entered my late 20s and early 30s, the anger slowly began to morph into something else, a deep, profound regret. Regret for the lost years, for the unsaid words, for the shared experiences we would never have. I started to question the righteousness of our parents' feud, realizing that their pride had stolen something irreplaceable from us. I began to understand that my own passivity, my own silence, born of hurt and a misguided sense of loyalty, had been just as destructive. I hadn't fought for our friendship, not truly. I had retreated, licked my wounds, and allowed the chasm to widen without making a single courageous attempt to bridge it. This realization was a bitter pill to swallow, forcing me to confront my own culpability, my own fear of rejection. The isolation I felt was not just from Emily, but from a part of myself that had withered in the shadow of that unresolved pain. The question, what if, haunted my quiet moments, a relentless whisper of a life that could have been, filled with the warmth of a friendship I had foolishly believed was eternal.
The turning point, ironically, didn't come with a grand revelation or a dramatic intervention. It came subtly, like the first tentative shoots of spring after a long, barren winter. I was approaching my late 30s, and life, in its relentless march forward, had thrown me a curveball. My younger brother, Michael, suffered a serious accident and was hospitalized for several weeks. It was a terrifying, isolating time, filled with uncertainty and fear. As I sat by his bedside, watching him fight for recovery, the triviality of past grudges and the destructive power of silence became overwhelmingly clear. Life was too short, too fragile to carry such heavy burdens. One evening, while leaving the hospital, I saw a familiar figure at the information desk. It was David Miller, Emily's father. He looked older, his shoulders slightly stooped, the jovial spark in his eyes dimmed. He was speaking quietly with a nurse, concern etched on his face. My heart hammered against my ribs. It had been nearly 20 years since I'd last spoken to him, or to any of the Millers. The instinct was still to look away, to walk past, to maintain the ingrained wall of silence. But something shifted in me that night. The sight of him, vulnerable and worried, pierced through years of hardened resentment. The feud, the pride, the anger, it all seemed so utterly meaningless in the face of human vulnerability. I took a deep breath, a breath that felt like it had been held for 2 decades, and walked towards him. "Mr. Miller?" My voice was a shaky whisper. He turned, his eyes widening in surprise, then quickly narrowing with the flicker of the old animosity, a familiar defensiveness. But it didn't last. The worry on his face for whoever he was visiting seemed to override the ingrained reflex. "Sarah? Is that Michael I just heard about?" His voice was gruff, but held a tremor of genuine concern. I nodded, tears pricking my eyes. "Yes, he's going to be okay, we think. It's been rough." And in that moment, the dam broke. We talked, not about the feud, not about our mothers, but about Michael, about life, about the passage of time. He even offered to bring over some lumber from his store for a ramp my parents were considering from Michael's return home. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a monumental act of truce. Emboldened by this unexpected, fragile connection, I knew what I had to do. The next day, after much agonizing, I found Emily's contact information through a mutual friend. My fingers trembled as I typed out a simple message. It wasn't an apology, not yet. It was just an opening. "Hi, Emily. It's Sarah. I heard about what happened with Michael. I was thinking about you the other day and just wanted to reach out. No pressure to reply, but I'd really like to talk if you ever feel up to it." I sent it, then threw my phone across the room, my heart a frantic drumbeat in my chest, convinced I'd made a terrible mistake. Hours later, my phone vibrated. Her name. My hand shook as I opened it. "Sarah, I'd like that very much. When are you free?" Our first meeting was at a small, unassuming coffee shop on the outskirts of Willow Creek, a neutral territory, far from the ghosts of our past. It was awkward, painfully so. We sat across from each other, two grown women who were once inseparable girls, now strangers navigating a minefield of unspoken history. We talked about trivial things at first, our jobs, our lives, the weather. But then, slowly, haltingly, we started to talk about us, about the feud, about the pain, about the silence. There were tears, bitter and hot, shed for lost time and missed moments. There was anger, softly expressed, for the injustice of it all. And there was a profound, aching relief, the kind that comes from finally giving voice to a sorrow held captive for too long. We didn't hug. We didn't promise to be best friends forever again. That would have been a lie, an attempt to erase decades of separation. But we acknowledged the loss. We both expressed regret, not just for the past, but for our own roles in perpetuating the silence. I confessed my anger at her for not reaching out. She admitted her hurt that I hadn't fought harder. It was a raw, honest conversation, devoid of blame, filled with the bittersweet truth of two lives irreparably altered. It was a hard, slow process, not an instant fix. The chasm hadn't magically disappeared, but a fragile wooden bridge had been extended across it. The life lesson I carried from that arduous journey was profound, and it reshaped the very core of who I am. I learned that pride is a corrosive poison, eating away at the most precious bonds until only dust remains. I learned that silence, however seemingly safe, can be far more destructive than any argument. It festered, it hardened, it built impenetrable walls where understanding once stood. But most importantly, I learned the immense, terrifying, yet ultimately liberating power of vulnerability. The courage it takes to break the silence, to extend an olive branch, to admit hurt and offer forgiveness, even when you're not sure it will be reciprocated. It's not about winning or losing or proving who was right. It's about valuing connection over ego, compassion over pride, and the enduring human need for reconciliation, even if it's just with the fractured pieces of your own past. Emily and I are not back to where we were. The innocence of our childhood friendship is gone, replaced by something more mature, more fragile, yet perhaps more real. We exchange messages now, sometimes meet for coffee. We acknowledge birthdays and send condolences. The ghost of our shared past still lingers, but it no longer haunts me. It stands as a solemn reminder of what was lost, but also of the strength it took to find a path back to a cautious, respectful understanding. Our story is not a fairy tale ending, but a quiet testament to resilience, to the enduring hope that even the deepest wounds can begin to heal, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply daring to speak after years of silence.